Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Five for Breakfast. We're now on our 30th episode of 2023. Before I kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor for Five for Breakfast. In Washington, it's the last week before the August recess, and yes, Congress is actually going to have an August recess this year. And the Senate's focused on finishing the National Defense Authorization Act, affectionately known as NDAA. It's going to take up most of the floor time. However, there may be a move by the Democratic leadership to bring Ana Gomez's nomination to the floor. Originally, she was going to be grouped with sitting FCC commissioners Starks and Carr, but the Democrats want to get her in place as soon as possible, and Starks and Carr are both in holdover position or periods, so they can continue to serve, so there's no real urgency to get those votes. Tomorrow, the House Energy and Commerce Committee is going to vote to mark up the bipartisan legislation HR 4510. This is the NTIA Reauthorization Act of 2023. It's been over 3 decades since NTIA was last authorized. And this legislation is going to improve the management of spectrum, develop a national strategy to close the digital divide, and update the mission and functions of the agency. Back at the FCC, Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel has shared with her FCC colleagues notice of inquiry. They'll kick off the agency's annual evaluation of the state broadband across the country as required by Section 706 of the Telecom Act. Rosenworcel proposes that the Commission consider several crucial characteristics of broadband deployment, including affordability, adoption, availability, and equitable access when determining whether broadband is being deployed in a reasonable and timely fashion to all Americans. The NOI is going to renew a push to increase the national fixed broadband standard to 100 meg down with the 20 meg up, which, given that 88% of service providers are offering gigabit or more, seems like too little too late, but the current standard is 25.3, so I guess we should probably get around to doing this someday. But the NOI is going to propose a separate national goal on 1 gigabit by 500 meg, which is a little more realistic. Coming up quickly is Fiber Connect 2023 in Orlando, August 20 to 23. We are less than 4 weeks out, and we have completely sold out the Gaylord Palms, and we have opened up reservations at the Delta by Marriott, which is right around the corner. So if you haven't registered, please do so, because the Delta is going to sell out soon. Our next and final regional Fiber Connect workshop will be in Minneapolis on October 24th. So you're not going to want to miss that, so please register today. All right, so that brings us to today's Five for Breakfast session with John Gabriel, Senior Advisor at the Center for Employment Opportunities, to discuss a fair chance hiring with conviction. But before I formally introduce today's guests, I'd like to introduce Trish Sheeler from the team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thanks, Gary, and good morning to everyone who's joined us today. Before I go over a few logistical items, I'd like to once again thank our platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco. Now, if you'd all keep in mind that you're all in listen mode only, to ask a question at any time, just type it into the question box located within your control panel on the right side of your screen. We'll host a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's webinar. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on FBA's website within 24 hours. You can find the recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. We are also including these on YouTube and SoundCloud. At the conclusion of the presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a brief feedback survey. If you take a minute to do that, we'd really appreciate your input. I'll pass it back to Gary now to introduce our panelists and get us started. Gary?
Thanks, Trish, and good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Fiber for Breakfast, we had the pleasure of hearing from our good friend Ryan Kuntz, the Managing Director and Senior Research Analyst at Needham. And Ryan discussed the federal funding and economic impacts on the fiber broadband industry. So a couple key takeaways is that the fiber industry is going to be very robust through the end of the decade, and he believes that the supply chain and inventory levels will be normalized by the beginning of next year. So that's all good news. Today on Fiber for Breakfast, our guest is John Gabriel from the Center for Employment Opportunities to discuss a fair chance hiring with conviction. John is a senior advisor, works for the Center for Employment Opportunities, focusing on equity into the employment landscape for every person. John cares deeply about working to support the members of our society that are in the greatest need. One of the most marginalized demographics in our community includes those that are justice involved. I love these words, John, justice involved. And they are punished long after incarceration has ended. His strategic goal is to implement a genuine positive change that directly supports people with past convictions. John's formal education includes a master's of business administration from Pepperdine, and John has significant experience in corporate operations and has helped organizations maximize their social, societal, and economic value within national and global networks. So John, welcome, and for audience, please type in your questions as we go. So with that, I'll kick it over to you, John, to take us away.
Well, thank you for that very dramatic introduction. I recognize that those perhaps are some of my own words, but I think that then no further introduction is required, and so we will simply jump into the topic. So basically, we're going to be talking about hiring with conviction. And so just to give a brief overview of our organization, we, CEO, the Center for Employment Opportunities, provides immediate, effective, and comprehensive employment services. And that is specifically to those who are members of the reentry population, those who are on supervised release. And of course, there is the social agenda aspect of what we do, but this is also really about matching two needs together. There are a tremendous amount of employers within our country that have open roles that they often struggle to meet the needs of their open roles. We have what to some degree historically has been an untapped population of individuals who are ready, willing, and able to fill those roles, both from a soft and hard skill standpoint. And so it's really matching those two together. And that's at the end of the day, that is why we do what we do, both for the social good, but also for the economic mobility of the individuals in that population and for the prosperity of the country as a whole. Next slide. All right, so during today's agenda, we're going to kind of cover these topics. I'm going to give a brief overview of the criminal legal system. I'm going to discuss transferable skills. We'll discuss fair chance hiring, and then focus in on the business case. And you may wonder why an overview of the criminal legal system. I'm not necessarily that interested in it. I think some people have different conceptions and in some cases misconceptions about what goes on during the life of an individual in the carceral system. And the reality is it is an intensely rigorous environment that results in individuals having a life experience that can then galvanize them as individuals and make them a better, and I'm going to repeat that, a better employee for an organization going forward, because they have gone through something that is what is arguably a very high pressure situation. And again, these are not individuals in the system. These are individuals who have successfully navigated the system and are out and are ready to rejoin society and, more importantly, the workplace. Next slide. Okay, criminal legal system 101. So some of you may look at this and think to yourself, this looks very overwhelming and confusing, and it is by design meant to look overwhelming and confusing because that is literally what the system is, for someone to navigate through and ultimately successfully get out. It is by design meant to snare people in and keep them, almost like, I mean, if you look over on the right side, you can see that it's almost like a revolving door, and it's by design. I mean, the reality is that this is an industry in this country, and a hotel does not do well with empty rooms. The carceral systems do not do well with empty beds. So they want to keep people in there. But bottom line is, you can see all those green squares represent the kind of intake process that occurs. Somebody gets caught up in an issue, they're arrested, there's an arraignment, trial, guilty pleas, they're either acquitted or convicted. I can tell you that often once somebody is arrested, the likelihood of an acquittal is slim to none. I mean, the conviction rates are quite high. Often those don't necessarily always correlate with what was actually done. It's more a matter of, plea bargains and how can we move things through as quickly and efficiently as possible to ensure that people get into the carceral system, don't get out anytime soon. Next slide. Okay, so understanding the differences between prison and jail. So jail, that's meant as primarily as a temporary holding facility. And that's when somebody has been accused of a crime but not yet convicted. As stated here, it's typically county sheriffs or local jurisdiction that manages those. Here you can see that it says, pretrial up to 10 years of incarceration. So depending on the states, depending on the type of conviction, most often once conviction occurs, you are transferred to a prison, but in some cases, if it's certain charges, sentences under a certain period of time, then you can serve your time in jail. Typically, though, jails are not designed for long-term, long-term housing, and so the services that are available for everybody that's there are typically more limited. With the prison systems, those are indeed, designed for longer-term stays, and that is actually where people can get a dramatic amount of education opportunities, life skills classes, vocational opportunities, those kinds of things that will actually prepare them to relatively rapidly move into and join the workforce once they get released. Next slide, please. So again, brief overview of what goes on. There are medical facilities, but and actually, you know what? I'm just going to put this out there right now so you understand where I'm coming from my perspective. So Gary was very generous in his description of all of my experience, many years in the healthcare industry as a management consultant, but I myself made an unfortunate decision, and I spent a period of time in the carceral system as an involuntary guest. And so, that's where I'm coming from this perspective. So when I speak of what happens in the carceral system, I'm definitely speaking from a place of experience. But as you can see, there is medical evaluations that take place, but my point here is that it is very limited. Yes, the carceral systems do have certain types of medical specialists on staff, but the likelihood of an inmate getting the opportunity to actually see them is slim to none. The one thing though I do want to focus on here is the education. As they categorize people, they specifically categorize them based on education to ultimately provide them with additional education at an appropriate level. So if somebody comes in and they're a high school graduate, they will categorize them according to that. And then once they get to their permanent location, they will then receive opportunities to advance their education while incarcerated. After the assessments are taking place, then they're categorized and then set into the appropriate levels of prison. Next slide. So here's where we want to focus in on the various opportunities and the structure that is involved. There's education, self-help, and training. The scheduling within the carceral system is actually quite rigorous. I mean, you have to get up quite early for count, and then once you are counted, you then go on to whatever your work responsibility is. One thing I want to point out is in the carceral system, the correctional officer's sole responsibility is to maintain order and to ensure that those who are incarcerated remain incarcerated. Beyond that, everything else that occurs within the industrialized prison complex is run and managed by the inmate population, meaning all of the logistics, the ordering, the food preparation, the clothing, anything logistics related within the confines of the prison is all run and managed by the population, the inmate population. And so that gives individuals a tremendous amount of exposure to fairly significant responsibilities that are directly in line with responsibilities associated with full-time employment outside. One thing also to highlight, and this is specific to California, the conservation camps. If you qualify for them, you actually leave the confines of the prison and you go to a conservation camp, which is a minimum security facility. It's primarily managed by the Department of Forestry and Fire Prevention in conjunction with the CDCR. And again, this is specific to California, but they have similar types of programs in other states. But this is very significant responsibility. And not just the hand crews, but the entire running of the camp, the water treatment, The water and sewer plant operator run, all inmate run. The maintenance on all vehicles, all inmate run. So significant amounts of experience and rigor and discipline occurs within the prison systems. Next slide. One thing I want to emphasize here. So, you know, Gary pointed out that he liked the language in the description that he was reading. And the reality is language is very important, especially when it comes to certain minority and marginalized demographics. You know, when you refer to someone as a parolee, an ex-felon, a prisoner, yes, these are technically correct descriptions, but you are really, to some degree, assigning blame when you're talking. And I am not by any means, you know, minimizing the reality that something did occur, conviction did take place. In some cases, there are victims, but the reality is once you have served your time, you have paid the price, you have rehabilitated yourself, and you have exited the carceral system, to continue to, you know, punch down on an individual using what are less than flattering terms to describe an individual, it really does not lend itself well to helping that individual reintegrate into society. Because at the end of the day, I touched on it in the beginning, but it's all about, you know, solidarity. These are people that are part of our society. We want them to benefit. We want the organizations they work for to benefit. So language, in fact, does matter. Next slide. Okay, so I've touched on this a bit, but basically the transferable skills gained in non-traditional places of employment. Obviously, the non-traditional place of employment that we're talking about is our carceral system. Next slide. So I'm going to highlight some of the transferable soft skills. So communication. I'm going to tell you right now, everything means something in prison. There's no such thing as stray comments. You have to be extremely mindful of what you say, how you say it, tones, and all that kind of thing, because it is called doing time for a reason. And when you're doing time, people have time to sit and think and fixate on what is said. And so communication amongst individuals while in the carceral system becomes extremely critical. And so people really learn how to communicate properly, because it's, you know, it is what keeps things moving in a smooth and non-escalated type of manner. Problem solving. Resources are at an all-time scarce level in the carceral system. And so, you know, something that may seem very trivial on the outside, on the inside, because you have very, very limited access and you know, availability of resources, you have to figure out how to make things. I mean, you know, prime example, you smash your hand and you cut your finger. It can be quite a lengthy period of time before you're able to get in contact with a correctional officer. They get a medical person there. So you've got to figure out how to manage things. And so the level of creativity that is, it's, you know, they say that necessity is the mother of invention. I assure you, I've seen very creative approaches to a variety of issues within the carceral system, and those are very much transferable skills. It goes without saying, the ability to work in high stress environments. To describe the carceral system as a high stress environment, so I'll elaborate a bit more on my own background. I also served on active duty in the United States Army for 6 years, from 1995 to 2001. And I would tell you this, that the ability to manage stress, the ability to handle high pressure environments, it did equip me with certain skill set and tools that I leveraged while in the carceral system. I would not have perhaps gotten through it as smoothly as I did, and, you know, mentally, physically, emotionally intact had I not had those skills. And so I would say that the experiences are very parallel. So if somebody successfully navigates and exits the carceral system, they have similar levels of discipline and rigor and commitment to getting through something that a soldier does at the time of their discharge from active duty. So when you get out and somebody comes and says, hey, listen, I got this pile of work for you, and you need to get it done, you need to get it done by the end of the week, somebody who hasn't been through those types of experiences before may get stressed out, may have an ability, or may have an inability to get it done in a timely manner. But I can tell you this: somebody that's been through these types of situations will look at it and be like, you know what, not a problem. I'll categorize things, I'll figure it out, I'll create my timeline, and I'll drive towards that timeline, and I'll get it done. And so it's really a matter of framing based on their historical experiences. And then, of course, interpersonal skills, and this ties back to that communication piece. Interpersonal skills, I'm sure you may have heard, the politics that exist within the carceral system. Those are alive and well, and what is portrayed in the movies does not even capture a fraction of the intensity of what goes on from a political standpoint within that system. And so interpersonal skills, the ability to read both verbal, nonverbal communication, to adjust, the way you're delivering your information, very, very critical for maintaining peace and order within that environment. And so these are all things that become, almost second nature. It's tools of the trade to get through something in a successful manner. So these are things that are really baked into an individual, has come out, and these are things that are extremely valuable and applicable in the corporate world. Next slide. Hard skills. So I've touched on this already, but the vocational training, as I said, like the laundry, the clothing, the logistics, the ordering, all of those things are all managed. I mean, there's literally one free staff that kind of supervises everything, and then there's 30 of the inmate population that are assigned to running a kitchen or running the sew shop, or some of the prison systems, they have manufacturing furniture and parts and things. I mean, these are all things, like I said, all driven by the inmate population. Technical skills, I can reflect on my own experience when I went to, I myself was ultimately, the last, I think, year or so that I was in, I spent at a conservation camp, and I started out on a hand crew, but then they found out, I'm not sure how they found out, I think the way I spoke or something along those lines. They're like, you seem very, you're kind of an oddball here, what's going on with you? So they were able to determine that I had a tremendous amount of like IT skills. I had an MBA and had done management consulting for years. And so I ended up, being the clerk, which was basically doing all of the ordering, all the paperwork, all the processing for that particular camp. And so, obviously I came in with those, but there was a clerk before me, and then they trained them up on that. So people definitely come out with very hard IT skills, because every system, to include prison systems, are run by computers, and you have to have people on the inside that are managing all that. Social services. So some of the life skills classes that I mentioned, and the anger management, all those classes are facilitated by, so individuals are, they identify themselves as being interested in that. They are then trained up, and then once they're trained up, then that particular inmate will then provide those classes, and so they're able to cultivate and develop a tremendous amount of social skills. And then obviously entrepreneurship. There's an opportunity to develop art, and then you can actually then sell your art. You can, if you work in areas where you can do welding, you can create things and sell them. So it really does give people an opportunity to literally run a business. And so again, I mean, these are very, these are good skills. These are skills that are literally created through necessity and then galvanized through experience. Next slide. Soft skills, hard skills. One more. Okay, so recognizing transferable skills. Okay, so we can do an activity here. Have we had any questions yet? No questions?
We'll get into the questions at the end, but yeah, I mean, definitely some comments
right.
that come in.
Okay. All right. Well, so this is an activity, but I think for the sake of time, we can kind of, if anybody wants to just type in some responses. So basically, I'm just going to read a case study, and you kind of give an example of what you think might be a potential. Maybe just think through it, because like I said, for the sake of time, we'll kind of go through this rather quickly. But this is somebody's, they're giving the example. When I was in prison, there wasn't an opportunity to work. I did, however, find sobriety through AA. I began to facilitate AA groups in my prison dorm. So here's an individual who had an issue, they recognized the issue. They came up with a path to managing that issue. They then ultimately managed that issue. They then turned around and helped others who came from the same area, or came from the same suffering from the same vice, and helped facilitate their path down potentially like getting control of that particular vice. And so that is a key example of where both soft and hard skills can be developed through a very much a non-traditional, and in this case, somewhat challenging and unfortunate situation. Next example, when I was in prison, I was responsible for feeding 600 people per day. I have 3 children, and I'm going to tell you right now, cooking for the 3 of them, hugely complex. I can only imagine the logistics that goes into cooking for 600 people. And I assure you of this, in prison, as I mentioned, people have nothing but time to think about things. And so if you serve a bad meal, you know who to go follow up with to say, hey, listen, this meal wasn't good. So people who run the kitchen and prepare the meals, they take it seriously. A lot of complexity in terms of keeping on top of what needs to be ordered, the ingredients, et cetera, et cetera. And again, that is all run by the prison population. Last example, when I was in prison, I was a clerk in the law library. I worked under a correctional officer. My tasks included checking out books, keeping records, following up on past due items, and making copies. I mean, these are all, basic, clerical type of responsibilities that are immediately applicable to any corporate environment. And, like I said, I gave an example of myself. I worked as a clerk at the fire camp, which had, a tremendous amount. I mean, the daily operations is, is essentially like a little city that, was out in the middle of nowhere, and everything had to be managed from both a hands-on and logistics standpoint. So, I mean, as you can see, the things that occur in the carceral system with the prison population, these are things that are very valuable in the corporate world. Next slide. Okay, so what is fair chance hiring? I mean, it is exactly what it sounds like. It is giving individuals a fair chance at employment based on who they are, their skill set, and momentarily setting aside a past conviction based on, what is a mistake. But one thing I want to further emphasize, so creating a fairer chance. This isn't just about a fair chance, the fair chance for the pool of potential employees. It's also a fair chance for employers. And I stated it at the very beginning of the presentation, but this is an opportunity to match up, 2 areas of need. You've got employers who have job openings, lots of job openings, and not necessarily what they see out in the open playing field as enough bodies to fill those roles. But we feel we have this, what is largely untapped potential. And the reality is many people in the reentry population have significant experience, have significant education, but they're simply not given the opportunity to showcase that because they get eliminated from contention right off the bat. And and I'm gonna, like I said, I will use myself as the example. I'm here in California, and it will be an organization unnamed. They were beside themselves that somebody like me was willing to come and like interview for a position, and they straight up asked me like, what, and I'm like, well, I wanted to make a change. And we went through the whole process, and the hiring manager, they gave me the offer, everything was like good to go. And like the hiring manager was like texting me the other day, because I'd brought up all these different ideas about things they had never considered in terms of where they would get grant funding from, et cetera, et cetera. And he was like, yeah, I'd never considered that. I'm so excited. The reality is, in California, they've got to ban the box. So they never asked me about anything. But then when they ran the background check, it came back, and had the conviction, and they rescinded the offer. And the reality is, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure everybody's curious. I was convicted of something, something related to logistics, moving one thing from this place to another location, and perhaps it wasn't that, in line with the current laws of the land. And so did that mean that I would not have been an amazing employee for that individual? No, not at all. But the fact that they were, very hesitant to hire somebody with a conviction, offer was rescinded and moved on to other opportunities. And so, like I said, I think that I missed out on contributing to that organization, and that organization missed out on me contributing to them. So what fair chance hiring really is about breaking down those biases and giving everybody an opportunity to move forward in a way that's beneficial to everybody. But again, so, the primary focus of fair chance hiring, it's an employer's willingness to evaluate an applicant's skills before considering an application's past conviction. Obviously, I know that there are concerns about, safety and things of that nature, but people who get out, and especially those who are on supervised release, they have never been more legally compliant in their life. Safety, I mean, recognize that they're released, they're out in society, they're amongst you. The desire and willingness to work in whatever environment is, it's strong there. And so this is really just giving them that opportunity to connect with employment and be fruitful.
Hey, John, so just to wrap up, we had a bunch of questions that came in, probably you can follow up on a number of these questions.
Yeah.
But I guess the key to this, we're going to need about 200,000 fiber optic technicians across the nation. And people are asking, was there any training in the system that was focused on telecommunications, any of that kind of training? And then also, are there other issues of being able to get driver's license or business license or anything, that other impediments that people should be aware of?
Yeah. So, I mean, there is definitely technical training because, as I mentioned, there is they do manufacturing. Like there's the PIA, which is like a parallel organization that employs while incarcerated people from the inmate population, and so they do like electronics manufacturing. Is it directly attached to telecommunication? I mean, it's technical skills, manufacturing skills, tech related things. But I think that the ramp up would be relatively short for people with that type of experience.
So basically, you could identify people with aptitudes to go through like our fiber path optical fiber optic technician training and so forth. Right. And what about other things as far as
driver's license? Having a felony conviction does not preclude you from getting driver's license. All that type. I mean, I got my driver's license renewed as soon as I got released. None of that. I mean, most of the impediments that they face are really, I mean, the biggest impediment, and that's why we focus on it, is specifically the employment landscape. I mean, background checks do occur, and I think historically background checks, the design of the background check was to identify, hey, this person said that they worked here and that they have this education. That's kind of what the original intent of the background check was for. But then, kind of morphed into this more like, well, if you've got a criminal record, even if it's not necessarily anything related to what you're doing, like, we're concerned for our safety and things of that nature. But the reality is, even in the cases where somebody is convicted of a violent charge, often violence didn't even occur. But from a DA standpoint, they want those violent convictions. And so they say, hey, listen, we can take this to trial, and because you were in possession of X, Y, and Z, you're going to get 10 years, and we're going to get you on that. Or you can plead down, and we'll give you 2 years, but it's got to be a violent charge. Well, when you're sitting there looking at 10 versus 2, you take the violent charge, and that looks good for the DA, but then you are branded as a violent felon. Are you a violent person? Absolutely not. You're somebody who, made a mistake and got wrapped up in something, and you paid with your time, you rehabilitated, you went through the classes, and you're now ready to get back to it.
Well, John, really appreciate this. This topic is so important. We have not only 200,000 fiber optic technicians, but we have all kinds of deployment positions we need to be able to make sure that we can get this fiber deployed across the country. There's 2 million Americans in corrections today, and my belief is if we can get fiber to every American, we can help minimize the number of people going into corrections by providing more employment and education opportunities, and then also people coming out to be able to provide great opportunities, because this is definitely a a resource pool that we need to tap and make sure that we can be able to do that. So again, really appreciate it, John. Thanks for your passion and everything you're doing to help kind of make awareness and bring this forward. I want to thank everybody for joining us today and want to look forward to getting back together next Wednesday on Five for Breakfast. We're going to be talking with Rick Talbot of ACG Research to discuss the middle mile, more traffic than you were expecting. You're not going to want to miss that. So thanks, everyone. And John, again, really appreciate it.